I was reorganizing my grandmother's medication drawer when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't look at it. I was in the middle of sorting her blood pressure pills from her vitamins. She kept mixing them up and then calling me in a panic at 9 p.m., wondering why she felt dizzy, and I had a system going. But the buzz was followed by another one, and then another, which meant it was a real message from a real person and not just another pharmacy notification. I set down the pill organizer and picked up my phone. It was from my mother. "Hey, sweetheart, your father and I are on our way to the airport. We decided to take that trip to Cancun we've been talking about. Don't worry about us, we used some of the investment account to cover it. You and your brother have a great few weeks. Love you." I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the counter and stood very still for a moment, listening to the sound of my grandmother humming something in the living room. She does that when she's watching her game shows. Little tuneless sounds, like she's half in the room and half somewhere else entirely. I've loved that sound my whole life. It's the sound of being safe. I picked the phone back up. The investment account. She didn't say her investment account. She didn't say our family savings account. She didn't say our family savings account. She said the investment account. The one my grandmother opened in 1987 when she sold off her first property. The one that had all 3 of our names on it. Mine, my brother's, and hers, because Grandma had insisted on it years ago. "In case something happens to me," she'd said, "I want you children to be able to access it without a lawyer taking 6 months and half the money." My mother had been a co-signatory on that account for 15 years. She had never once used that access. Not when she and my father went through their rough patch in 2019 and they needed a new transmission for the truck. Not when the roof on their house needed replacing. Not when my father decided he wanted to start a pressure washing business and needed equipment. They'd figured it out on their own. Borrowed from friends, whatever. The account was Grandma's, and everyone understood that, even without it being said out loud. Until today, apparently. I walked into the living room. My grandmother was watching Wheel of Fortune and had a bowl of pretzels balanced on her knee. She looked up when I came in and smiled, and I smiled back, and I sat down next to her on the couch and pretended to watch the screen while my brain went somewhere else entirely. I needed to know exactly what had been taken before I did anything. My name is Cassie. I'm 31 years old. I work as a paralegal at a small family law firm, which means I spend my days surrounded by exactly these kinds of situations. The quiet betrayals, the financial maneuvering, the way people who love each other can become strangers the moment money enters the room. I'm not cynical about it. I've just learned to pay attention. My brother, Theo, is 28. He lives 40 minutes away and works in IT. We're not the kind of siblings who text each other memes all day, but we show up for each other when it counts. He moved into an apartment near Grandma 3 years ago, specifically so she wouldn't be alone on our side of town. He mows her lawn in summer without being asked. He's a good person. My parents were complicated. My mother grew up in this town. My father came from somewhere else and never quite stopped feeling like an outsider, which I think is part of why he was always looking for the angle, always half convinced that someone somewhere was getting more than him. They loved us. I believe that. I also know that love doesn't always translate cleanly into behavior. My grandmother built everything she has by herself. My grandfather died when my mother was 16, and Grandma went back to work the following week. She cleaned houses, then managed properties, then bought one small rental unit, then another. She is 79 years old, and she is the sharpest person I know, and she's been quietly terrified for the past 2 years that the people she loves will forget that everything she's worked for was meant for her first, and for us second, and not as a convenience fund for someone else's vacation. She'd mentioned it to me once, obliquely. "I just hope everyone remembers what that account is for," she'd said, after a Sunday dinner where my father had made one too many comments about Cancun. I had filed that away. I should have done something with it sooner. That's on me. I waited until Grandma went to bed that night before I called Theo. He answered on the second ring. I could hear him typing, probably still working. "Did you see Mom's message?" I asked. A pause. "The Cancun thing?" "Yeah, I saw it." I've been waiting for you to call. That's the thing about Theo. He doesn't perform reactions. He just waits. She said they used the investment account, I said. I know. She didn't ask Grandma. I know, Cass. We were quiet for a second. Outside, a car passed. I was sitting in Grandma's kitchen with the lights off because I hadn't thought to turn them on. How much do you think they took? Theo asked. I don't know yet. I'm going to call the bank first thing tomorrow. Okay. Another pause. What's the play here? And that was the question, wasn't it? Because here's the thing that nobody tells you about these situations. The ones that happen inside families, behind closed doors, dressed up in casual text messages. There is no clean answer. You can't call the police on your mother the way you'd call the police on a stranger. You can't just send a strongly worded letter to someone who has your grandmother's guest bedroom photos on her screensaver. The rules are different and also the same, and you have to hold both of those things at once. I need to see what we're dealing with first, I said. Then we figure it out. I called the bank the next morning before I went into the office. The account was still open. No flags had been raised because technically my mother had the legal right to access it. She was a co-signatory. She hadn't broken any laws, technically. What she had done was withdraw $14,000, which was, according to the customer service rep who read me the transaction history in that flat, careful voice they use, processed as a wire transfer the previous afternoon. $14,000. $14,000 for a trip to Cancun. I thanked the rep and hung up and sat in my car in the parking garage for 4 minutes doing nothing. $14,000? My grandmother's money. Gone to a resort I'd never seen. To pay for a vacation I hadn't been told about by people who had smiled at her kitchen table 3 Sundays ago and eaten her pot roast and let her refill their glasses without ever mentioning any of this. I am not someone who cries easily. I work in family law. I have sat across from people going through the worst moments of their lives and kept my voice steady. But I sat in that parking garage and I cried for about 90 seconds, hard and ugly, and then I wiped my face and got out of the car and went to work. Because there were things to do. The first thing I did was talk to one of the attorneys at my firm. Not as a client, I couldn't afford that, but as a colleague, as someone who needed to understand the landscape. He was patient with me. He asked the right questions. He pulled up the account structure on his computer and walked me through what it meant. The account, as structured, gave my mother legal access. She hadn't forged anything. She hadn't broken in. She had used a right that had been extended to her in good faith for a purpose it was never meant for, without telling the person whose money it actually was. The question, he said, is whether your grandmother wants to pursue this. She doesn't know yet. He nodded slowly. That conversation is going to matter. I knew that. I'd been turning it over in my head for 2 days, thinking about how to tell her, thinking about what it would do to her face when she heard it. My grandmother had spent her whole life trusting carefully and being repaid for it. This would not be easy for her. But I also knew her. She is not someone who looks away from things. I told her on a Wednesday evening. I brought dinner, her favorite chicken piccata from the Italian place she's been going to for 30 years, and I sat down across from her at the kitchen table and I told her everything. The text message, the amount, what the bank had confirmed. She listened without interrupting. That's something I've always admired about her. She doesn't fill silence with noise. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her hands. She looked at the wall. She looked back at me. $14,000, she said. Yes, for a vacation. That's what it looks like. She nodded once, not in agreement. More like she was filing something away. And your brother knows? Yes. Another nod. What do you think we should do, Cassie? And that is, I think, the moment I will remember longest from all of this. Not the text message, not the bank call, not any of the things that came later. That moment. Because she asked me. She didn't collapse and she didn't rage and she didn't pretend it hadn't happened. She asked me what I thought, like we were partners, like she trusted me to help her think through it. I think, I said carefully, we should remove them from the account. She held my gaze. All right. It might cause a fight. I know. They'll say we overreacted. They'll be wrong. She said it the way she says everything, simply, without drama. Let's do it. The next morning, Grandma and I went to the bank together. She was dressed like she was going to church, good coat, her pearl earrings. She walked in there like she owned the building, which is a thing she has always been able to do regardless of circumstance. We sat with the branch manager, who was very kind and very careful, and Grandma removed my mother's name from the account. It took about 25 minutes. There were forms. At one point, the manager asked if everything was okay, and Grandma said, "It will be," in a tone that ended the question. On the way out, she squeezed my hand once and let go. That was it. No dramatics. No tears. Just two women walking out of a bank on a Thursday morning. The text started 4 days later. That's how long it took. 4 days of Cancún silence, of Instagram stories showing turquoise water and poolside drinks, of my mother tagging herself at restaurants with my father looking tan and relaxed. And then, on day 4, something must have shifted. The first text was just to me. "Hey, can you talk? The resort is having an issue with one of our cards." I stared at it. Then I typed back, "What kind of issue?" The charge went through when we checked in, but now they're saying there's a problem with the account we had on file. I think it might be the joint one. Can you look into it? I want to be honest about how I felt in that moment. I did not feel triumphant. I didn't feel satisfied in any clean, cinematic way. What I felt was something closer to tired, deeply bone-tired, mixed with a very clear and calm sense of, this is the consequence. This is just the consequence of what you did. I typed back, the account was restructured. You'll want to use your own card. A very long pause. I watched the dots appear and disappear twice. What do you mean, restructured? Grandma made some changes. You'll need to call her if you have questions. The dots appeared again, then stopped, then appeared, then another long pause. Then, Cassie, what did you do? Not a question, a statement. I put my phone down. They called Grandma before they called me. I found this out later from her in the same matter-of-fact way she tells me everything. Your mother called, she said when I came over the next evening. She was watering her African violets, which she does every Thursday without fail. She was very upset. What did she say? A lot of things. A small pause. She said I'd been manipulated, that you had turned me against her. She moved to the next pot, tilting the watering can carefully. She cried, "I'm sorry, Grandma. Don't be." She looked up at me. I told her that I made my own decision, that no one turned me anywhere. Her voice was steady. She didn't like that very much. I bet she didn't. She also said that $14,000 wasn't a big deal in the context of everything she's done for this family over the years. I felt a familiar low heat rise in my chest. And what did you say to that? My grandmother set down the watering can. She turned to look at me fully. I said that she was welcome to send me an invoice. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It came out of me unexpected and real, and my grandmother smiled a little, and for a second it was almost like things were normal. Almost. They came home 11 days early. I don't know if the resort situation escalated or if they ran out of money, or if my mother simply couldn't stand being away from the confrontation. Probably some combination. They showed up at Grandma's house on a Tuesday without calling first. Theo and I happened to be there. We'd come for dinner, which we've been doing more often since all of this started, not by agreement, but by some unspoken collective pulling toward. We were in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. My grandmother answered it. Theo and I stayed in the kitchen. I could hear them in the hallway. My mother's voice, high and tight. My father's, lower, more of a rumble. Grandma, steady as always. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I know those voice patterns. I grew up in them. After a few minutes, Grandma appeared in the kitchen doorway. They'd like to come in and talk, she said. To all of us. Theo and I looked at each other. Okay, I said. We sat in the living room. My grandmother in her usual chair. Theo and me on the couch. My parents on the love seat across from us, which meant they were facing us in a way that felt oddly formal, like an intervention in reverse. My mother had clearly been crying recently. Her eyes were puffy. My father looked like a man who had decided he was going to be very calm, which with him usually means he's actually very angry. I want to understand what happened, my mother said. She was looking at me. I want you to explain to me why you went behind our backs and took away my access to that account. It wasn't behind your backs, I said. Grandma made a decision about her own money. You weren't there to consult because you were in Cancun. We had a right to that account. You had access, I said. That's different. That is splitting hairs, Cassie. You took $14,000 without telling her. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Not angry, just clear. Without asking. You sent a text from the airport. That's it. That was the notification she got that her money was being spent on something she had no part in choosing. Silence. My father looked at his hands. We plan to pay it back, my mother said. When? When we could. From what? Theo spoke up. I hadn't heard his voice yet in this conversation. He has this quality where when he does speak, you pay attention. From your salaries? You've been talking about being stretched thin for 2 years. You were going to pay back $14,000 when? My mother's jaw tightened. That's not Mom. Theo's voice was quiet, not unkind, but very firm. We're not angry that you wanted to take a vacation. We're sitting here because you took money that doesn't belong to you and you didn't think it was worth mentioning. The room went quiet. My grandmother had not spoken yet. She was sitting in her chair with her hands folded in her lap, and she was watching all of us with an expression I've seen on her face before. Not distant, not cold, just very, very still. The expression of someone who has been through harder things than this and come out the other side and knows, with a certainty none of the rest of us have yet earned, that this too is survivable. I would like to say something, she said. Everyone looked at her. I love you, she said to my mother. Simple, direct. I love your father. That's not in question. She paused. But I worked for 40 years for what I have. I cleaned other people's houses. I fixed leaky faucets in rental units at midnight. I didn't have anyone to catch me if I fell, and so I was very careful, and I built something. Her voice didn't waver. That account is not a safety net for anyone else's choices. It is mine, and I will decide what happens to it. My mother was crying again. My father still hadn't looked up. I'm asking you to pay back what was taken, Grandma continued. All of it. We can work out a schedule that makes sense, and I'm asking you to understand that this, what happened, cannot happen again. A long silence. I'm sorry, Mom, my mother finally said. It came out small. I'm sorry. I don't know what I thought. I know, my grandmother said. That's part of the problem. It didn't fix everything. I want to be clear about that. Things like this don't get repaired in an afternoon. My relationship with my parents shifted in ways I'm still understanding. There's a wariness now that wasn't there before. Not hatred, not estrangement, but a kind of careful attention I didn't used to need. My mother started paying back the money in monthly installments. It's slow. It's awkward. There have been months where the transfer was late and nobody said anything about it directly and everyone felt it anyway. My father has never once apologized to me personally. I've stopped waiting for it. But Grandma is okay. Her account is whole again, slowly. Her name is on updated trust document that Theo and I helped her put together with an actual attorney, one that spells out clearly and without ambiguity what those funds are for and how they can be accessed. It took 2 afternoons and a few $100s, and it is the best few $100s any of us have ever spent. She still hums during Wheel of Fortune. I still come over on Thursdays. She still always has pretzels. I think about something Theo said to me, maybe 2 weeks after that living room conversation. We were driving back from Grandma's and the sun was going down, and he was quiet for a long time. And then he said, almost to himself, I think I used to believe that if you love people enough, they won't do things like this. I didn't say anything. That's just not how it works, though, he said. Is it? No, I said. It's not. He nodded. Not sadly, just the way you nod when something finally lines up, when a thing you've known somewhere inside yourself for a long time finally becomes something you've said out loud. We drove the rest of the way without talking, and it was the most comfortable silence I can remember. What I know now that I didn't fully know before: love is not the same as trustworthiness. Family is not the same as permission. And protecting someone you love sometimes means being willing to be the person they're angry at for a while. That part is hard. I won't pretend it isn't. Standing in that living room while my mother cried and looked at me like I'd done something cruel, that was not easy. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone doing a very hard and very necessary thing and wishing somewhere small and still inside me that none of it had been necessary at all. But it was, and I did it. And Grandma is okay. That's the part I come back to when it gets heavy. She's okay. The thing she spent 40 years building is still hers, and whatever else happens, whatever uncomfortable dinners and awkward holidays and careful silences come next, I know that I was here and I paid attention and I didn't look away. That's enough. It has to be, and actually it is. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in some grand philosophical way, just in the quiet, practical way you think about things when you're driving home alone and the radio's off and there's nothing to distract you from what's actually sitting in your head. My mother made a choice. She made it casually, from an airport in a text message that was probably typed in under 30 seconds. And everything that followed, the bank visit, the living room confrontation, the awkward monthly transfers, the way she and I now talk to each other with a little more distance than we used to, all of it flowed directly from that one casual choice. That's the part that stays with me. Not the drama of it, not the anger, just the simple, unignorable facts that actions move outward like ripples, and they don't stop just because you've already boarded the plane. What Grandma showed me in all of this, and I don't think she was trying to teach me anything, she was just being herself, was what it looks like to have genuine moral clarity. She didn't perform her hurt. She didn't weaponize it. She sat in her chair and she said I worked 40 years for what I have, and it was the most dignified thing I've ever heard anyone say in a difficult moment. That kind of clarity doesn't come from being cold. It comes from actually knowing what you value and having spent a lifetime building something on purpose. She knew what that account meant because she remembered every year it took to fill it. I think about that when I'm tempted to be careless with something that matters. With a relationship, with money, with a promise. Grandma never had anyone to catch her if she fell. So she was careful. Not fearful, careful. There's a real difference, and watching her is how I learned it. The hardest part of this whole thing was standing in that room while my mother cried and looked at me like I'd done something to her. That feeling doesn't go away cleanly just because you know you were right. Being the person who holds a line is uncomfortable. It costs something. I felt it in my chest for weeks afterward. This low, persistent ache that wasn't quite guilt but lived in the same neighborhood. But Theo said something that helped. He said he used to think that loving people enough would prevent them from doing things like this. And the quiet, hard truth is that it doesn't. People make self-interested choices regardless of how much they're loved. Recognizing that isn't cynicism, it's just accuracy. And once you accept it, you can stop being surprised and start being prepared, not in a defensive, closed-off way, but in the way that Grandma was prepared, with paperwork, with clear expectations, with the willingness to have a hard conversation before the damage gets worse. What I know now is that protecting someone is an act of love, even when it doesn't look like one from the outside. Cassie removing my mother's name from that account wasn't a punishment. It was Grandma being finally, clearly protected. And doing that, showing up for her, sitting with her at the bank, staying for dinner more often just so she wouldn't be alone in this. That's the kind of person I want to be. Not because it's easy, because it's right. That's the only thing that actually holds up over time. Doing what's right, quietly, even when it costs you something. Everything else is just ripples.